So continuing from the theme of macro goals, right? Basically, inflation was our third macro problem, and as I repeated a few times already in the chapter on goals, you primarily learn two things, right? You want to learn factors, which is largely related to ADAS plus some non-ADAS stuff. Okay, as far as you're concerned, to date, right, growth and inflation very heavily tied to ADAS. Okay, unemployment has the ADAS part, which is cyclical, and then the rest doesn't have anything to do with ADAS. It's not visible in the diagram, so to speak. That's why when we think in terms of factors, we always think in terms of ADAS, then non-ADAS factors, right? So inflation, growth, very heavily tied in with ADAS, very visible in the diagram. The factors follow ADAS factors. Unemployment has a fair bit of non-ADAS stuff, okay? And on the other side of factors will be consequences, right? And consequences will pertain either to achieving or not achieving the goals, okay? So when we say consequences, we really just means, any benefits or costs associated with either achieving or not achieving the macroeconomic objective. And of course, what goes on top of all these things is you just need to know a little bit on what an ideal state of the economy looks like in terms of what we're trying to achieve, right? So as I started each chapter with you, growth, unemployment, inflation, I actually walked you through what different countries expect out of their own nations and their economies and kind of what you should be aiming for. So it's really just three pieces, right? If you learn goals like that, it's actually really, really easy to learn. And as I mentioned as well, the reason why we learn it like that is because very often you get questions that test you according to these silos. And knowing how the information is organized is always useful in econs, because when you want to create an essay, you want to build an essay structure, that is really important to know how the key information is organized. Otherwise, if you try to stitch it together, then you don't necessarily get the requisite balance that you're actually looking for. Okay, inflation last week we did, first of all, I taught you that it's a sustained increase in general price levels, right? That's what inflation is. We talked about the fact that inflation could be a result of demand pool factors, right? So it has to do with AD. The diagram that I gave you last week looked like that. Right, I told you to draw more than one shift in order to have a persistent increase in general price levels. Alright, that's what inflation is. And then we also learned that inflation could be due to cost push factors. So that's when your SRAS shifts up as a result of an increase in the aggregate cost of production. So in this case, the diagram will look like this. Right, this persistent shift in your SRAS leading to persistently rising general price levels. Any of these factors could lead to cost push inflation. And I mentioned to you that out of all of them, C is very important because it's Singapore's biggest risk of inflation, and macro as a subject requires you, macro as a chapter requires you to know very intimately Singapore's macroeconomic conditions. They will give you essays based on that. You need to have contextual knowledge on it, and it will largely shape your evaluation. So if you don't know like Singapore related stuff, then you're going to have difficulty dealing with essay questions that have to do with Singapore because you can't evaluate. Your essay has no direction. You don't know what it's supposed to say. Okay? So that's the second set of factors. Sorry, I took a chair away because I thought I was obstructing you. But if you want it back, I did remove it back. Okay, and then we had two very heavy pages on consequences of inflation. So on one side, we talked about why do we aim for a low and stable rate of inflation. Why, for instance, we target like 2% annually. And on the other side, we also talked about the consequences of high and unstable, unanticipated inflation. Right? And one of the key things I told you last week was, what's the difference between the two? And why do we learn them separately? Is because actually, when you think about the benefits of inflation, the funny thing about inflation is that unlike growth and employment, the benefits is not that obvious. Right? Why do I say that? Because if you look at inflation, 2% inflation still means that general price levels are rising, correct? So that's why a lot of people struggle. When they write essays, they can't explain it because in their mind, it doesn't check out. Why in the world do you want higher prices? So these are the 4 reasons, right, why we actually like inflation, why we want general price levels to rise. And I also mentioned to you that point number 4 is really an aggregation of the first 3 points. The long and short of it, if you actually summarize and think about what these 4 points are trying to tell you, is that, as I said last week, I said a low and stable rate of inflation is really a backdrop for economic growth and employment. Right? Inflation by itself doesn't actually yield direct benefits. Right? Because it's rising general price levels, that doesn't yield any direct benefits. That raises cost of living, that makes it more expensive for households to consume and purchase goods and services. So by itself, inflation doesn't really do much for you, but the beauty of it is that it's a backdrop to growth and employment. And the truth is, if you look at your 4 macroeconomic goals, the 2 of them that's really the most important in terms of raising as well has to do with growth and employment. That's the biggest 2 things. That's the 2 things that really directly benefits the population. One is about income, the other one is about employment. You put them together, it means more people are employed, more people are getting higher incomes. That's why those 2 are really important. Inflation as a goal serves as a backdrop to continuously yield higher and higher growth rates, higher and higher employment rates. Okay, so just a quick emphasis there because it's something that people struggle with in terms of articulating in essays. And in fact, some schools do not even explicitly tell you what the benefits are. They give you the costs, and they actually need to be able to flip it and to figure out what the benefits are. So that's actually what it is if you don't actually have it in your notes. Okay. So we're gonna pick off with inflation. So deflation, if deflation like inflation, right, has same set of causes, right? Deflation can be brought about by a fall in aggregate demand, a rise in SRAS, or a rise in LRAS as well. As I said to you when we talk about inflation, LRAS as a factor, not so common, right? Not so common, you don't get big abrupt shifts in LRAS. LRAS is really a very modest, gradual thing that happens over time. Because if you look at the factors that affects LRAS, they don't happen overnight. They take a while. They take a while to manifest, right? Increasing quantity of FOP, increasing quality of LP, technological advancements, those take time. So 1 and 2 is the most important. LRAS is more progressive, more gradual. So we focus primarily on AD and SRAS. Deflation, as I told you last week, is a persistent fall in general price levels, right? It's a persistent fall in general price levels, so it's the opposite of inflation. Causes-wise, if we draw them diagrammatically, it's quite straightforward, right? If you think about inflation, this is just the opposite. Okay, so that will cause deflation, right? Falling AD. Okay, and rising SRAS. Remember that for SRAS it's a bit confusing. Rising is actually shifting downwards. Okay, falling is shifting up. So if it confuses the hell out of you, then don't say shift up or down. Just say that SRAS is rising or falling. Then when you talk about the diagram, you say upward shift, downward shift. Okay, at this point I want to re-emphasize something. The reason why ADAS is very important for you is for one very simple reason. When you do goals, when you do policies next time, to figure out what happens, right, you need a method. You get what I mean? It's like math. Like if you know what plus does, then I tell you 1 plus 1, you will know that it's equals to 2. Or 2 plus 2, you can extrapolate from that. Same for econs, right? When you look at ADAS, you need to understand, right, what drives AD, what drives SRAS, what drives LRAS, and then from there, you go figure out what happens to your macro goals. Okay? So when you go back to my models or macro notes, right, the reason why I summarize the factors for you in a very compact fashion is because you do need to know those rather well. Okay, so if you're still confused about ADAS, you need to go and log it. ADAS, you just need to know 2 sets of things. I need to know the factors and the mechanism. That's it. So if you're going to make notes for yourself, you're going to do a mind map, just focus on these 2 things. What affects AD, LRAS, SRAS, and be able to explain the mechanism. When AD shift, what happened? When SRAS shift, what happened? LRAS shift, what happened? Right? That's basically how you compartmentalize your knowledge. Okay? And for this, application is more important than memorization. Because I just need you to know what the factor is. Like wealth is a factor. Confidence is a factor. Then you should understand how it works and be able to put it in your own words. Because it's not like micro, there's no requirement for you to explain it in a particular way. As long as you can tell me what it is, it will be fine. Okay? Another reason for it is because when we learn goals, you see every chapter we've done so far, very nice, very neat, very distinct. Oh, I show you, growth is like that shift, employment is like that, inflation is like that. But when you actually get questions, they're not going to give it to you like this. They're going to ask you things like, Singapore aging population plus falling productivity. They ask you, how does this, should this be a concern for the Singapore government? So you're supposed to take this, figure out how it affects the ADAS and non-ADAS factors, then figure out what happens to goals. You see? So it's not going to be so neat and so nice they test you one goal at a time. They're going to give you a scenario and ask you how it affects the goals. That's why you need to know your factors very well. Because I give the scenario, you tell me what the factors are, the factors affect ADAS like that, this is how it affects the goals. You get it? So eventually when we do questions, we have to kind of do it in a reverse fashion. Now I tell you the goal, then I tell you the ADAS. But when you do questions, you actually really start from ADAS and then you figure out what the goal in fact is. Okay, so just a gentle reminder, if you're doing it in lecture right now, just take it as a recap, pay a bit more attention. As you go into exams, you need to know this well. Okay, but this is kind of like background knowledge because they don't test you directly, but you need to know it to answer questions. Okay, so deflation. Consequences of deflation, there's 5. Before I go into it, okay, you see the biggest problem that people have with deflation is very similar to the problem they have with why inflation is good. Because deflation is a fall in general price levels. If you take it at face value, this is fantastic, right? Because this tells you falling cost of living. Right? Rising purchasing power. Right? It should be improving as well. Especially for this diagram over here. This is the one that really messes with people's minds because if you look at the diagram, it's like, oh my god, right? National income is rising alongside falling GPL. Isn't that great? Right? That should be a good thing, one. Correct? So people cannot wrap their head around why this is bad. Right? Similarly for LRAS, if you do the LRAS version, people will draw this diagram and they can't wrap their head around why this is bad. Right? Because income is rising, you get potential growth. Deflation, so what? The only one that people can vaguely understand why it's bad is this one. Right? But the explanation will be flawed because people's understanding will revolve around the falling national income. That doesn't strictly speaking explain why deflation is bad. Right? If deflation is supposed to be bad, you should tell me what's the problem with falling GPL. Not that it's accompanied by falling national income, correct? That is a side effect. SAD is falling. But that doesn't really tell me why deflation is bad. Right? So I'm going to teach you how to think about the consequences of deflation. And I think it's something I mentioned last week as well. Right? Which is this concept of what I call information value. The information value of general price levels changing. I think I mentioned last week, right? Which is that when we do microeconomics, we talk about prices. Correct? We know that prices has a signaling and incentive function. That's what we say in demand and supply. So that shortage surplus, they can eliminate themselves because they go iron themselves up. Because the prices changing signals and incentivizes people to change their behavior. The truth is, it's the same at a macro level. Changing general price levels persistently in a certain direction sends certain signals to different economic agents. And it makes a difference. It's a big deal. The information value affects what happens in future periods. It affects the what happens next. And that's the biggest problem with deflation. Okay, so let me tell you what I mean by that. Let's look at point number 1. The first consequence of deflation is that there will be a holding back on consumption spending as consumers expect further fall in prices, resulting in further falls in aggregate demand, precipitating a deflationary spiral and recession. This expectations of fall in prices is a factor of consumption. If you go back and look at your ADAS notes, you will see that. But expectations of future general price levels. And it's very easy because it's very much like the factor you've learned in demand and supply, right? As demand's falling, or rather, if you expect prices to fall, demand's going to fall. Because you're going to hold off spending and buy in the next period when you expect prices to go down. right? And this is why in real life you see the economy going in cycles, right? Because expectations perpetuates movements in the economy in different ways. So you see, right, very funny, you take a step back and think about it for a moment. Why economic booms and busts go up for like, oh, 80 rise for a few years, then drop. When it's in an upswing, prices are going up, right? Incomes are rising, employment is going up. It feeds a positive feedback loop. So people spend more, prices go up, they think prices will go up some more, they get more employment, more income, they're going to spend some more. So there's an interplay between expectations and what's happening in the economy. Same for when there's a downswing. Right, so once sentiment and expectation changes, you start seeing the downswing set fall. So as people cut consumption, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Then AD falls, then income falls, unemployment rises, GPL falls, it perpetuates further negative expectations. So this is why it's a big deal, right? C is going to fall when there's deflation. So if we look at the first case, what we are saying is that AD will fall, and then fall some more. Right? Because there is a pessimism permeating the economy. People expect prices to fall further, so they perpetuate this downward spiral in the economy. Now if you think about SRAS and LRAS, the truth is the same thing can happen. Even if the deflation is brought about by a rise in SRAS or LRAS, if people get it in their minds that this fall in general price level will continue, they will cut spending. They'll be like, well, if it's cheaper the next period, well, they will cut spending on things like food. They'll cut things, what we call discretionary spending. Okay? If you ever work in anything corporate next time as a corporate analyst in consulting, in banking, or business strategy, or you're a management associate and all that, if you're very in the business side of things next time, you'll be very familiar with this term. Because when we think about household spending and consumer spending, right, we generally split them into two categories. Okay? We call them discretionary and non-discretionary spending. As the name suggests, right, non-discretionary are things that you have to buy regardless of, well, how the economy is doing or your income level. So things like your staples, your basics, your food, right, your basic clothing, not like expensive clothing, but basic clothing, your utilities, right, rent, meaning shelter, rent being the cheapest form of shelter, as opposed to buying, things like that. So that's non-discretionary spending. Discretionary spending typically are your big ticket items that you don't need. Your appliances, right? Renovating your house, a car, gadgets, things like that. That's all discretionary spending. So once deflationary expectations sit in, the first thing that will start falling off are all your discretionary spending. So if you follow the news right now, China is supposedly going into a bad patch, economic growth rates are slowing. How do we know that it's a problem? China's car sales fell the first time in 20 years. Never fallen before. Every year people are buying more cars. It's the first time car sales are falling. House purchases are falling. Furniture purchases are falling. Appliances purchases are falling. That's when you know they have a problem. Right? And that will perpetuate further deflationary expectations if that sets in. So discretionary spending, you can use this term. It will actually make your essay better. Okay? Discretionary spending. The other thing we talked about, I think briefly was, we will talk about a very related concept. It's called durable goods. Okay? Normally discretionary spending on durable goods. So again, gadgets, appliances, cars, furniture and stuff like that. Okay? So the first one is that you'll perpetuate a fall in consumption. Number two, perpetuate a fall in investments due to a fall in business confidence as profits fall with general price levels. So you see, the thing to remember here is, when we talk about revenue, right, in micro we talk about revenue, we talk about price and quantity and revenue. Revenue, profits are all in nominal terms. When prices are rising, right, general price levels are rising. For the average household, you're talking about cost. From the producer's point of view, you're talking about revenue. With falling prices, it means falling profits. With falling profits, will you want to invest? Absolutely not. Especially if you expect the fall in prices to continue. Because it's very simple, right? Last week when I explained to you the benefits of inflation, when I invest today, my factory could take 2 years to build. By the time it's done, I'm selling at prices 2 years in the future. But I'm spending money today, you see. So I pay today's cost, and I earn money in the future. In an inflationary environment, that's fantastic, right? I buy a factory today, I build everything up, I pay today's prices. Inflation goes up by like 4% over the next 2 years. I get 4% higher selling price than I can today, but I pay historical cost. That's fantastic, right? That increases my profits over time, increases my selling price. So investment is very heavily influenced by inflation expectations. So conversely, if you have deflation, firms will become really pessimistic. They'll be like, why do I want to invest? First of all, my profits today are already falling, right? Secondly, I'm going to be paying today's prices and might end up selling at lower prices in the future. And on top of that, think about what deflation conveys to firms. Will a strong economy have deflation? Now some of you might argue, you might look at these two diagrams here about the SRAS and LRAS and go like, you know what? Okay, well, a strong economy can also have deflation, but here's the thing. In a strong economy, one of the biggest defining factors for a strong economy is rising AD. Now the truth is, if your SRAS is falling but your AD is rising by a lot, you could still get an increase in general price level. You see that? So again, if you think back, remember when we did economic growth, the ideal growth diagram I made you draw? We had AD rising with LRAS rising, but I told you, make sure your GPL rises by a bit. Remember that? I told you to draw it that way. Why? Inflation expectations. Very important. A strong, growing economy should have AD that's rising. Right? If it's rising, then it encourages firms to invest more. So if firms see a deflationary environment, the first thing they'll think of is that I don't think the economy is doing great. If the economy is not doing great and demand is not high, why should I invest? Right? Because you invest is for more capacity to produce more to accommodate higher demand in the future. But if you don't expect demand to go up, you will have no incentive to invest. Absolutely none. Okay? So that's C and then I. 3. Real cost of borrowing increases. Right? Real cost of borrowing increases. And 3 and 4 kind of goes together. Debts increase in real terms, repayment increases in real terms. You see, inflation is great because inflation ultimately erodes the value of debt. So one of the easiest examples I can give you is, say for example you buy a property for $500,000. You take out a $400,000 mortgage, and let's say your repayments are about $2,000 a month. Okay? So that's your repayment, that's your debt. In an inflationary environment, it's fantastic because first of all, the real value of the debt is going down. The real value of the repayments is going down. At the same time, the rental that you can potentially collect keeps going up. You see the logic there? Makes sense, right? Because rent follows nominal terms. In a deflationary environment, the opposite happens. The real value of your debt goes up, the real value of your repayment goes up, and in nominal terms, the rental income you're collecting will fall. So that's horrendous. No one wants to be borrowing in this time. So once borrowing falls, C and I will go down. Households cut borrowing, they spend less. Firms cut borrowing, they invest less. Right? Lastly, balance of payments. Now actually, interestingly, the impact on balance of payments will be indeterminate. Okay? While deflation boosts export competitiveness and encourages consumers to switch from foreign imports to domestic goods and services, I think you understand this, right? Although we haven't done BOP in detail. If you actually go back to look at my ADAS notes, I hope you recall this. When we're trying to talk about why AD is downward sloping, we talked about this concept of international substitution effect, right? I told you that general price levels fall. One of the reasons why your output and your spending rises is because you will buy more domestic stuff, you will buy less imports, and more foreigners will buy from you. Remember this briefly? So, on one hand, deflation should boost export competitiveness and encourage consumers to switch from foreign imports to domestic goods and services, right? So that's the good side, but the bad side is the negative impact on confidence and expectations could discourage foreign direct investment. which could lead to an outflow of money. So the benefit side is on the current account side. My current account basically tracks the trade balance. That's the biggest component. This part is about the financial account side, which tracks investments. So we're trying to say the BOP impact is not so straightforward. We don't know how deflation will hit your balance of payments. Whether it's good or bad, it really depends on where your starting point is. Okay, how dependent you are on export-imports, how dependent you are on FDI, are you originally in surplus or deficit, what else is happening in the economy. Okay. Questions? Go. Okay. Once you go to the toilet, can I just get you to flip to page 6?
So we'll draw the diagrams.
Yeah, just fill out the diagrams. Just back, I've got a couple more things to say before I get us started on the hydro. I think the only one you struggle with is the wage price spiral, so you can skip that. But I think you should be able to fill in the rest. Is inflation or deflation what? Inflation or deflation what?
Depends if which one's higher. Like if it's like hyperinflation, that's probably the one.
Okay, that's a good answer. That's not complete, but that's a good direction. So you do enough econs, right? Especially in macro, you will know that 9 out of 10 times when we ask you questions like that, like which is worse, which is more important, the answer is always it depends. And then you tell me what the condition is, right? What the criteria is. Now, by and large, generally speaking, deflation is always worse than inflation. Deflation is what countries always try to avoid. Because once you find yourself in a deflationary spiral, it's extremely hard to get out of it. Okay? Next time when we do policies, you'll understand why, but it's very hard to get out of a deflationary spiral. Once people have it in their minds that deflation has set in and it's going to continue, it's very hard to get them out of it. Right? At the same time, that doesn't mean that inflation is not an issue. Inflation could be an issue if it's high and unstable. So, why am I talking about this is very simple. When you think about consequences of deflation and inflation and trying to argue whether inflation or deflation is worse, you always need to think about two things. And this is very useful even when thinking about your other macro goals and problems. Whenever we ask you whether a macro problem is a cause of concern, or something along those lines, that means how worrying should this be? Should we intervene to try to fix the problem? Always think about two things. Magnitude and persistence. Okay? Magnitude and persistence. And to be able to discuss magnitude and persistence, you inevitably need to think about factors, which means your answer will always involve thinking about what is the underlying cause. The underlying cause will tell you the magnitude and the persistence. Even for economic growth, for example, right? When you get high growth, or when you have negative growth, you can have negative growth because your trading partner is slowing down, or you can have negative growth because your export industry sucks. Correct? So your products are terrible and you're not selling exports versus your trading partners are slowing down, which one is worse? That is quite clear, right? If your products suck, that's worse because that problem is not going away. So the underlying factor is always very important in assessing magnitude and persistence. So having said that, if we apply this to inflation, then the way to look at it is very simple. If you get transient deflation or transient inflation, it'll never be a big issue. So the example I've been giving, I think I shared with you all last week, that Singapore, I think late last year, right? Like late last year and 18 months before, we were having deflation for like more than a year. You look at our CPI, it was negative for like an extended period of time, but Singapore's economy did great. Nothing we discussed here happened. Why? Because that was all transient. That was because oil prices were artificially low for an extended period of time. So our CPI got dragged down by one thing, low oil prices. But the economy was still fundamentally very robust. People were still spending, car prices were still going up, housing prices were going up, food prices were going up. It's just that overall the CPI is coming up. So overall the GPI is coming down, but in micro markets, they were still doing great. So in real life, it's not so simple. We're not dumb enough to just look at the CPI, right? The underlying factors matter. And that's the thing that we hope to impart to you that you can appreciate when you do essays. That it's not so clear cut, it's not black or white. It's not about where the GPI is going. It does depend on this. So the way to write essays like that is that you lay out all the, oh, you know, if this happens, this could be bad. If that happens, this could be bad. If that happens, this could be bad. Then in evaluation, you say, well, to decide whether it's bad or not, we need to look at magnitude and persistence, which means we need to look at underlying factors. So given that this is a factor, that is not really that big of a deal. Okay, that's the way you need to learn to argue. That's the way you need to understand this. Teach you factors, we teach you consequences. But the overarching takeaway, as far as the goal is concerned, is you need to be able to tell, right? Is it a big issue? Is it not a big issue? Which is a bigger issue? What should you prioritize? Well, it depends on these things. Okay? Okay. Note this down. I'll talk about it again when we do questions. For sure, it'll keep coming up. But good to have that understanding first. Okay, on page 6. Okay, inflation, you see that. Deflation. Okay, of course you can draw the SRAS version as well. So inflation will be like that. Deflation will be like that. Okay? This inflation is falling rate of inflation, meaning you can do something like this, where the increase basically gets progressively smaller. Okay? The increase gets progressively smaller. Lastly, wage price spiral is a unique case. Right? The funny thing is, they've taught this over the years, right? It's never come out ever before. Don't know why they teach it, don't know why they don't want to test it. But what the wage price spiral is, I think I briefly explained the other day. It's an interplay between wages and inflation. So it goes like that. Okay? For example, workers expect inflation rate to rise, so they negotiate for higher wages. Okay? They negotiate for higher wages. So when they negotiate for higher wages go up, right? There will be cost push inflation. So your inflation rate will rise. Right? At the same time, workers with higher wages, right, will have more purchasing power over time. They will be able to accumulate more wealth. They're going to spend more money. Then it creates even higher inflation rate. Now because of that, the inflation rate probably exceeded their expectation when negotiating for wages, so they're going to negotiate for higher wages again. And then you're going to go there, and then you get an idea, it's just going to keep going on. So this is called the wage price spiral. Right? Inflation interacting with wage negotiation. So if your wages go out of hand, you're going to get this hyperinflation scenario. Okay? So the long and short of it is expectation of inflation. You negotiate for wage increase, but this is to falling SRAS as aggregate COP rise. Then there will be increased AD from higher C, then higher inflation rate, increased inflation expectations, and then you rinse and repeat again. Okay, so it's this SRAS go up, AD go up, SRAS go up, AD go up. That's why it's called wage price spiral. Prices keep spiraling higher. So negotiate higher wages, SRAS falls as aggregate COP rise in AD from higher consumption, higher inflation rate, higher inflation expectations, and then rinse and repeat. Just be careful. This is a very special scenario. We almost never use it unless we are asked for it. Okay? This can be argued as a small consequence of rising inflation rate. But it's not the norm. It doesn't happen most of the time. So we don't talk about it at all. Okay? We talk about it, we get tested. The reason why you have funny things like that, right, that you have in your notes that doesn't really seem to make sense, that we don't see in real life, is because a lot of these economic theories, right, were devised in a very, very different era, in a very, very different economy. So when might this have happened? This is very likely to happen in Europe, because Europe were very strong labor unions. So when they negotiate for higher wages, right, it really permeates through the entire economy. And if they all on aggregate get more wages, they're going to have more spending power and they will increase consumption. So this wage price spiral will be very real there. But you don't see it in Asia, because Asia don't have unions. Right? Asia by and large have very poor union representation, very poor worker protection. That's just the way we are. So how come we don't see it in Europe today? Because Europe's economic growth is crap. So their inflation rates are low, there's no such issue. You see, that's what I mean by it was probably derived and observed in a very different era. Right, so economies change, transform, different economic structures around the world. So it sounds very theoretical, but it probably was a very real thing at one point in time. Right, but no longer very relevant in today's world. That's why I guess they don't test it much.
What does the bottom dotted line refer to?
That's the original GPL level, where the AD cuts the original AS. Sorry, I know my diagram is a bit scrappy, but you get the idea. Like AD keep rising and SRAS keeps going up. That's basically what it is. So you see this spiral, you just go left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, and GPL will go up. Okay? Ken? Questions? Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to thumb through the notes, because the little practice is going to be on inflation. Okay, so I'm going to give you 5 minutes to read through. Don't do the question first. Just read through. I'll come around to give you paper, and then I'll start in 5 minutes. I'll start about 4. Use the keywords. Then use your own words and examples to help me make sense of what you are trying to tell me. Right, the best part I always like to use for articulation and explanation is this. You think about a topic that you really like, whether is it a book that you really like, right? Or maybe you are very good at violin or something. When you try to teach your friend who doesn't understand what the thing is, you will dumb it down for them, right? You need to make sense for it to them. You cannot just use jargon. That's the way you articulate essays. You start with the jargon. Oh, inflation is what. Then when you explain examples and you articulate, you need to simplify it. That means using simpler language to explain the cause and effect, to illustrate using examples. You're supposed to explain how it works, much like what I do for you all in class, where I explain the things to you, right, when you see it for the first time. So I want you to work on structure, I want you to work on the articulation. Try to explain. Right, try your best to explain, make sense of it. And lastly, of course, the evaluation. Right, what's the final answer to the question? Okay, so a couple of key ingredients that I want you to focus on. Please feel free to refer. Your essay length, frankly, eventually your part B should tend close to 4 pages, but for now I'm happy with 3. Okay, just for the sake of practice today. Okay, it's about 4 now. I'll give you until 4:30. Okay, please keep an eye on the clock. Take the chance to do a proper timed practice. I'll give 30 minutes, write part B out in full. Okay, and then we'll run through it, I'll collect it and mark, and then we'll spend some time talking about part A. Before I ask you to look at the essay analysis and outline, I just want to talk you through the question first. Okay, we talk about structure and so on. The question is discuss whether the failure to achieve low rates of inflation in Singapore is more likely to be caused by domestic or international factors. One of the first and biggest struggles that people face in economics, right, is not understanding how the essay questions work. So what do I mean by that? If you look at a question like this from a neutral, general point of view, it's very tempting to try to answer the question right off the bat. That means, oh, Singapore is more likely to be caused by what? But once you do that, you will die. Because the question requires you to talk about both. So first and foremost, my 2 sides, right? I'm going to need domestic factors and international factors. So pretty obviously, this is a factor question. That's the first thing you're going to get. Okay? So your essay needs domestic and international to hit L3. You don't have, once you have half, you're going to fail, for sure. Regardless of how well you write it. Okay? I need domestic, I need international, that's my balance. So on one hand it could be international, on one hand it could be domestic. That's one. Number two, there's a second layer to it. What did we learn about factors? Right? What did I teach you about goals? Right? I told you that goals got factors, got consequences. I told you one other thing as well, which is every goal can be split into two parts. Growth has actual and potential. Employment has cyclical and the rest. Inflation has cost push and demand pull. And I told you before, the reason why I teach that to you is because they will never explicitly tell you that you need both. But you do. And if you don't, again, you're going to fail the question because you're not even going to cross L2 or substantially pass L2. So you're going to chop this up, and your true essay structure will look like this. So you have four major sites to cover. Last thing. A failure to achieve low rates of inflation can mean two things. If you fail to achieve low rates of inflation, most people's first conclusion is, right? High inflation. But there's a second side as well, which is deflation. Also qualifies as a failure to achieve low rates of inflation. Right? I want low rate of inflation means I want 2%. So if I get 10%, I have failed. I get minus 2%, I also fail. I get 0, I also fail. I get minus 1, I also fail. So if you really think about it, it seems like we need 8 paragraphs for the essay, right? Because I have 4, and if I need to duplicate the 4 across inflation and deflation, it seems like I need 8. But you actually don't. Because the good news is that their factors overlap. Any factor that explains domestic demand pool can be flipped around to talk about deflation, right? The mechanics is exactly the same, but in reverse. So all you have to do is, if say you talk extensively about inflation, you just spend like 4 to 5 lines to talk about deflation. I'll show you how later as we go through the essay outline. So knowing how to plan out the essay is very important, because if I know that I need to cover 8 things, then I can go and figure out how I can manage the length, because it's not possible. You cannot write 8 paragraphs, there's no time. So you just do 4 major ones, and then you touch on both within that paragraph. With some emphasis on one, and less emphasis on the other, just for completeness. Cool? Okay? That's the essay outline. As I explained to you, the biggest takeaway, I mean, now you just learned this topic. I don't expect you to write it perfectly, so I don't really care about how good your explanation is. But first is, do you have the right approach to figure out what the essay needs to cover? That's important. So if you didn't understand the significance of what I was explaining to you previously, in terms of balance, I need demand pull and cost push, factors and consequences and stuff like that, now you start to understand. A lot of people struggle with this question when they see it for the very first time. Okay, apart from all this, is that they can't really figure out what domestic and international factors mean. This is where your ADAS powers comes in. Because actually within ADAS you have internal and international factors. These 3 are domestic, this is international. By and large, okay, there's some overlap, like there are things that you can say that are international that affects I also, but this is the easiest way to chop it up. AS, you have imported FOP and the rest. So in case you're wondering what domestic and international means, that's what it means. This question wasn't exactly a TYS question. The TYS question that came out actually tested a few goals together. So I modified it and I turned it into this. But when they first tested this question, a lot of people were struggled because this concept of domestic or international factors never ever appeared explicitly in your notes. No one teaches you to chop it that way. You see? But they can. So it's about familiarizing and finding balance. Of course, along the way, as you do more and more of these essays, you have better and better exposure. Then you have a better and better idea of how to chop the essays up. Right? But figuring out these little nuances is the first step to doing the essay well. Because your essay is not structured like that, it's almost impossible to pass. Because these are the major pillars. Right? You almost cannot leave out any one of these things. Okay? Okay, once you're done taking down whatever you need to take down, can you turn to page 3? So skip page 2 first. Page 2 is the answer for A. Let's jump to page 3. Okay, question analysis. Hardly questions. When you do it, first instinct is always to hunt for the two sides. What are my two sides? So your two sides are domestic versus international. Okay, as usual for ghost questions, it's essential to consider the causes. So it's necessary to arrange the domestic and international factors along the lines of demand pull and cost push. So you need one domestic, one international for each. So that's 4 major paragraphs. Do also note that failure to achieve low rates of inflation could manifest as both deflation and high inflation. You do not need to regard both cases in equal detail because they will share factors, as I was telling you just now, but you do need to discuss both. So if you go with inflation, the deflation bit can be a bit brief. What I mean by that is, there's one rule that I prescribe, which is when it comes to mechanisms, we don't repeat ourselves. If I draw a diagram in full, and I explain the mechanics, and later another point needs to use the same thing, I don't draw again, and I don't explain again. I just do it in brief. I just refer to the early part. So that's why you can do this. Because if I give you an example, later you will see, right, something like confidence. If confidence is good and you get demand pull inflation, right, as a domestic factor, you can get deflation if confidence falls and turns negative. It's the same thing, but just happening in reverse. So you do not need to go through the whole long-winded explanation of, oh, when confidence falls, households will react like what, firms will do what, blah, 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 therefore. Simple. Keep it simple. So you don't have to repeat the whole thing again. Okay, that's a trick that you can learn to manage your essay length. Okay? So, deflation bit can be brief. Again, do not get ahead of yourself and say that SG's inflation will be foreign. Analyze both cases, right? This is what I was telling you. A lot of people have this tendency, especially when you do econs essays for the first time or you're not very familiar, there's this urge to want to answer the question. You're supposed to answer the question at the end. That's how econs work. It's a bit long-winded. You go round about, you lay everything on the table, you name every possibility under the sun, then you say, oh, most likely it's going to be this. Okay? The fact is, Singapore can experience inflation due to domestic factors, such as tight wage market or strong investor sentiment, so you do need to have a balanced argument before evaluating. The international factor more likely. 4 major paragraphs basically, as I drew for you just now in the table. Do remember that ADAS is not a factor. This is very, very, very important. So one of the major mistakes that people make in questions like that, right, is that they stop at the level where they say, oh, you know, one factor could be a rise in C. So if C rise, AD, blah, blah, blah. Wrong. When you talk about factors, I need a scenario. So I need you to dive into the underlying reason that is driving that component to change. So AD is not a factor, C is not a factor. What's a factor? Wealth is a factor. Changes in confidence is a factor. Changes in interest rates is a factor. Changes in foreign national income levels is a factor for exports. I need the underlying and I need you to explain it. Okay? This is the thing about macro. The beauty is if your writing is quite strong and you understand, right? Macro is very easy to do. Because the explanation can be done in your own words using common sense in a GP-like language. It's not the same as micro. Micro is very rigid. Micro requires you to explain in a certain way. Macro does not. So this is one skill you can learn when you study, which is you understand the thing and you put in your own words. Okay, but I do need the underlying factor. Lastly, do note that policies can also be considered domestic factors, but they are best placed in the evaluation. The role of policies is that they can influence the extent to which these factors actually impact Singapore's inflation rate. Now, I don't expect you to put this now, because you haven't done policies yet, but it's a good FYI for future reference. Okay? Government policies. You haven't learned anything about it, but you know that government policies are designed to manage macroeconomic goals. So it is a domestic factor, right? Because if externally something is happening, the government can put in mitigating measures to mitigate the impact of inflation. So that is a factor as well. Okay? But if you're going to talk about that, put that in the evaluation. Down the road, not now. No expectations for you to do it now. Okay, let's look at the essay body. Introduction. Okay, just two things. A failure to achieve a low and stable rate of inflation could manifest as deflation or high and stable rate of inflation. The former is a persistent fall in general price levels. I'm just defining deflation. You would probably have defined inflation in the first essay. Okay? A country's inflation rates can be affected by demand pull and cost push factors. For a small and open economy like Singapore, these factors could be due to changes in the domestic economy or the international economy. Simple, as usual, I ask for two things. I ask for clarity and direction. Right? Clarify the question, give me a direction for the essay, that's all. Very simple. Okay? Body. Okay? So later you'll see very simple. There'll be a domestic demand pull, domestic cost push, international demand pull, international cost push. That's it. Okay, that's how you organize the paragraphs. So this, I write a bit longer. What you will find out is in my essay outlines, right, I omitted the diagram, which I'll just draw for you very quickly here. Okay, and the mechanism explanation. Because that's copy and paste. Okay, that I left that out. I focus on showing you how to explain the factor. Okay? Okay, so this is the accompanying diagram that you should have. And there should be a paragraph on the mechanism of it. Okay? That's what you need when you actually write the essay. By giving it an outline. So I left that out. Because this is copy and paste. Straight out of the notes. Okay? So let me explain to you how to frame this. Okay, how to put it into the essay nicely. Singapore could experience a high and stable rate of inflation if there is a sudden improvement in household and business confidence. Perhaps due to an improvement in Singapore's global business rankings and a strong stock market. This is the structure I want you to learn. Do you have to say business ranking or stock market? No, you can come up with anything yourself. But if you're not confident, then mark what's from the lecture notes. Okay, the whole point is to explain how the sentiment improved. Okay, in fact, you can go one step further, right? Before this sentence, you can even say, oh, when confidence rise, households are more inclined to purchase durable goods, such as, right, as they feel more optimistic, blah, 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 blah. This is what I mean by articulation. And you can see that if you really look at it, right, there's very little keywords that's really very important there. It's just very commonsensical explanations, right? They feel more optimistic, they are more confident about their outlook, they think that they can hold on to their jobs, they think that there will be pay raises, they will spend more. They will buy more durables like cars and furniture and whatnot. Very simple. That's what I mean by articulation. So you can go one step further from what I gave you here. You can do the same thing for firms as well. They will mark you for these things. Okay? It's important to have some terminology, but the broad sentence is general explanation. It's English. Okay? In such a case, there will be a substantial increase in both the consumption and investment component of AD, leading to an increase in the aggregate demand. Through the multiplier effect, this could result in a more than proportionate increase in AD, as one man's spending is the income of another. Okay, this is always the key phrase that we put in for multiplier. Right, one man's spending becomes the income of another, which induces further spending in the economy. Okay, and then I tell you, with part of the increase reflected in a higher general price level and partly as higher level of national income, which is what we see over here. Okay, so your diagram and your mechanism slots in after this paragraph. Okay, then you all know what I mean by reversing the point. Is this bullet point over here? Very simple. Conversely, should there be a worsening of household and business sentiment, C&I will fall, leading to a fall in AD and GPL. Through the reverse multiplier effect, this could lead to deflation due to the persistent fall in GPL from the multiplied decrease in AD. Okay, you can go a little bit more. Again, I'm giving you point form, right? But you can briefly explain, oh, you know, if confidence fall, then people will cut back on what kind of stuff, so C will fall. and so on and so forth. But there's no need to repeat the mechanism in full, is what I'm saying. Can? Get the drift? Okay, let me scroll up. Next will be the domestic cost push point. On the other hand, Singapore could experience a high and unstable rate of inflation if there were an increase in aggregate cost production in the economy. This could be a result of a hike in indirect taxes, such as the planned increase in goods and services tax between 2021 and 2025. You don't have to use this, you can use labor costs, you can use whatever you're comfortable with. Okay? In terms of how realistic it is, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, first and foremost, it's important to have a point. Okay? That you can justify, you can explain logically. You know contextual stuff, even better, that's a bonus. But cannot, never mind. It can be anything, you can choose to go with labor, but you cannot go with things that are blatantly wrong. So you cannot talk about, oh, like Singapore oil prices go up. Cannot. Because we got no oil. Okay? Later on, when we finish macro, I had this chapter on Singapore, where I'll teach you all the Singapore related macro stuff. So after that, my expectation for what your essay will look like will go higher, because that's your expectation for A's. But for now, I'll give you some leeway. So let's take note that there are some things that you can't talk about, but by and large at this stage, anything goes. Okay, anything that makes sense to you. So I went with indirect taxes, right? This is as domestic as it gets. It's set by the government. So if they raise GST, okay, so again, you see the articulation here? When indirect taxes are raised, it effectively raises the cost of production of all firms in the economy, as they have to pay higher taxes to the government from their sales. That's what indirect taxes are. Okay? The rise in aggregate cost of production results in a fall in short-run aggregate supply in the economy. So this is a bit of a mechanism for you in terms of how it should look like. So again, fill in a diagram. But this is not a full mechanism because I never reference a diagram, okay? So a diagram here. Okay? If you just want to draw one shift also can, but just remember what I told you. If you draw one shift, please say increase in inflationary pressures. Okay, don't draw one shift and say it causes inflation. They can knock you down. Especially if you are one of the better schools and they are really strict and they know, right, they will mark you down for it. Okay? So as SRAS falls, firms require higher prices in order to, higher prices to produce the same amount of goods and services on aggregate in order to maintain profit margins. The upward shift in SRAS results in rising GPI in the economy, raising inflationary pressures. Okay? Then again, this is the opposite. Conversely, a fall in aggregate COP, such as a continuous fall in labor cost due to the easing of foreign worker policy, could cause deflation as the GPL falls persist as your SRAS rises. Okay, so again, you can elaborate. If you ease foreign worker policy, increase supply of labor, reduce wages, right? Wages affect all labor in the economy, so fall in aggregate COP. So again, now you notice, I said before, right? Macro, a lot of flow chart, a lot of cause and effect. So the quality of your answer always hinges on the ability of you to articulate your cause and effect very well. Okay? Very important. Next point, international demand pool. As a small and open economy, Singapore is highly dependent on trade, with exports and imports totaling almost 400% of Singapore's GDP. Thus, inflation could also arise in Singapore due to a rise in net exports, possibly due to a rise in national income. So this one is important, this is the factor. Again, just to emphasize. Right? So I say I need the underlying, possibly due to a rise in national income of a major trading partner such as China. As real national income rises in China, there will be a higher demand for imports from Singapore. Right, for countries such as Singapore, because of this equation, right, this equation is very useful to use. Because this tells you that if Y increases, everything here has to go up. Right? Because of your circular flow. Y equals to CV plus STM. So the increase in export demand from China will lead to a rise in X minus M, assuming Singapore's imports stay unchanged, causing AD to increase, and via the multiplier effect, result in a higher rate of inflation, as explained earlier. So when you get to this point, This mechanics is exactly the same as the domestic demand pool one, so you don't need to go into details. Right? Just focus on making the arguments about why international factors might be a thing. Conversely, weakening economic conditions and falling GDP in partner nations will lead to a fall in X minus M, which could then lead to deflation in the economy. Okay? Okay, let me just say a quick thing up. Macro examples, important. Doesn't necessarily have to be real life or happen before, but you need the examples. Okay, they will mark you for it. Last body paragraph, international cost push. Okay? So Singapore is devoid of natural resources and thus depends heavily on imports for raw materials such as oil and metals. When there's an increase in the cost of these imported inputs, perhaps due to a weakening exchange rate. Okay, just let me explain this quickly here. You haven't done exchange rate yet, right? So I know you might not know this very, very well. You will know this better down the road and you will realize it's actually quite an easy point to use. So the way it works is this. If oil is US dollars per barrel, right? And now the Singapore exchange rate, 1 Sing dollar buys you US dollar, let's say 80 cents. Oh wait, this thing's not online. Okay, let's do it like that. USD 1 to SGD 1.5. Okay, so if you're Singapore, you'll pay $150 for oil. Now the Singapore dollar weakened. That means 1 US dollar is to, let's say SGD $2. Right? Because now you need to use more Sing dollar to go and buy the same US dollar. So you know Sing dollar has weakened. Then now your same barrel of oil, natural factors. Okay? However, due to the small and open nature of the Singapore economy, remember this phrase. As you do more macro essays, you will find that very often in evaluation, we will say one of two things, or sometimes both. We will say that in evaluation depends on state / and or nature of the economy. State means the macroeconomic state. That means how is the economy doing? What are the macro goals like? Does the government have very high debt? How is inequality like and so on? State refers to the more transient aspect of the economy. Nature reflects the more permanent aspect of the economy. So small and open is nature. Small and open has to do with the nature of the economy. Okay, what do we mean by nature of the economy? It's a more permanent characteristic. You can change it gradually over time, but it takes time to change. So one's more temporary, one is more permanent. So in this case, we're going to use the nature of the economy and say that, well, because Singapore is small and open, right? Both exports and imports play a more significant role in the Singapore economy than the domestic sector. Exports and imports total almost 400% of Singapore's GDP. This is important. This might be surprising to you. You might be like, oh my god, I need to memorize such things. You do, but it's not a lot. I will give you a list down the road when we do Singapore. Right? When I give you the set of notes about Singapore and the macro stuff. But you need to know about Singapore and use your knowledge to evaluate. Otherwise, there's no way to tell. How do you tell whether Singapore more prone to domestic or international? So it's a fact, right? In a way, it's a bit helpful because if you know what Singapore really is like, then you know what the essay is supposed to say. Well, that makes your life easier because you have a direction.
Wait, how do you hit more over 100?
That's a very good question. So the reality is, X is about 200% of GDP, M is about 170%. Meaning, X minus M is only about 30% of GDP. Okay? So when we quote the number 400%, right, it's X plus M. So it can exceed GDP, right? It can exceed GDP. So if you think about it, what that means is like, our GDP is about 300 over billion, exports is close to 700 billion. We export 700 over billion of goods and services, but we must net out the amount of imports that we actually consume also. So you net it out, that's actually only about 30% of GDP. But this 200%, right, down the road I'll talk about this again, but this 200% is a very, very big deal. Because we just assume, right, let's say a global recession, right, reduces most countries' exports by 10%. If you're China and X is 50% of your GDP falls by 5%. If you're Singapore and you get 10% fall in your exports, your GDP falls by 20%. That's a very big hole to fill. Right? That will be very, very, very hard to reverse. But if you're China and it's 50% of GDP and it drops by 10%, 5% is still manageable. Okay? Okay? So keep that in mind. We'll come back and revisit this down the road, so don't worry about it. But that's a good question. That's how. That's how we can exit. Thus, Singapore is generally more susceptible to changes in the inflation rate as a result of international changes affecting the AD and SRAS of her economy. Ken? Question? When I give you a model essay, especially outlines like this, if you can replicate the key elements, right, of this essay, that means if you can largely copy and paste this, right, with some gluing together, some diagrams and all that, you will easily get like 10 and above. There's a good margin for error, that means even if you make some mistakes here and there, you can probably do 10. 10 is 67%. Right? That's a great level to be at. So that's where I pitch my essays, and I don't expect you to write a perfect essay. It's impossible one. Because the biggest enemy is time. You can't write a good essay simply because there's not enough time. So the good news is that you don't even need to write a perfect essay. The way you need to study, the way you need to revise essays is, if I give you open book and I give you as much time as you can, you must be able to write a close to perfect essay. Makes sense, right? If I give you all the time in the world plus open book and you can't do the essay, that means there's something wrong. It's either you don't know the structure or your content cannot make it. Right? So eventually when you translate that into time pressure, the thing that you need to retain, right, when you have time constraint, the thing you need to retain is your essay must be on point. You need the major elements. Where you can make mistakes, where you can cut down is on the content depth. There is no timeline. It's impossible to write a good essay within time limit. Which means, right, if you really look at an A essay actually isn't that great because of the time constraint. So the upside, the good news is that when you write the essay, if you get the structure right, you don't make crazy theoretical mistakes. You don't tell me inflation is if GPL rises by 1 month, right? Things like that. You will generally be okay. It's very doable. Your biggest enemy is time, structure, and fatal theoretical mistakes. Okay, so when you practice, especially the closer we get to A's, I tell every batch this thing. In the earlier part of the year, you have more time, you can do a little bit more essays to practice. I try to give you in-class practice so that you don't have to go home and write a lot of essays. As we go into the second half of the year, right, we'll write less full essays, we'll analyze more essay questions. Because by then your content should be a lot there. Which means your biggest enemy is, in the time constraint, can I figure out what am I supposed to write? And that's the most important. So by the end of the year, we will easily have looked at 80 to 100 essay questions across chapters. Right? That's the volume that we do. Easily in the last 1-2 months leading up to A's, we'll easily look at 60, 70 questions. Right? That's the kind of volume that we're looking at nearing the end of the year. So for now, right, remember the structure, learn how to dissect the question, how to figure out what are the pieces I need, practice your content, right? Your part A's are important, you practice it for yourself. You need to make sure you can write it out. You need to make sure you can articulate. Or at the very least, when you study, right, after you study, sit in front of the computer, try to type the paragraph out. Because if you have never tried explaining the thing, you don't know whether it makes sense or not. And okay, we don't have time for A, but it's okay, just bring it back next week. We'll start with part A during next week's class. Can you write your names and pass me your essays?